Welcome to Making the Cut podcast with Chris Hill and Shawn Winter, where we help you succeed in life and business by sharing principles and strategies that guide some of the most successful people in the world.
Welcome to Making the Cut podcast. My name is Chris Hill with my co-host, Shawn Winter. Here on episode number 7, we have a special guest, Mr. Steve Sisler, a behavioral mastermind. And in line with that, Shawn, how about a little joke to kind of get us in the right mindset?
All right, Chris. So along the lines of behavior, and we'll even include personalities, how about this one? How many narcissists does it take to change a light bulb?
I got nothing, man.
Just one. All they have to do is hold it while the world revolves around them.
That's not you, is it?
No. Come on. In all seriousness, though, Steve Sisler and his work absolutely fascinates me. Ever since I took a DISC profile and started digging into my own behavioral patterns, it was incredibly interesting to me with how people act and how people operate, and I even incorporated this with my own teams. It's very hard to do it at times, to pull different schedules together. At the time, I think I had about 20 or 25 direct reports. But if you can pull it off, where you have your employees take DISC profiles, you take a DISC profile, you all talk about it, you can really understand each other, and it can start shaping that culture. And that's something that I'm excited to ask Steve about in his experience with companies in regards to how companies who want to incorporate this granular level of understanding each other, where do they get started? Like, how do they actually incorporate that? And I think for you, Chris, you did the DISC profile as well, right?
I sure did. And it sounds like Steve has my assessment results, and we'll be discussing them here on the show.
Ooh. Are you sure?
We'll see how that goes, my man. But like you, I've ever since high school, I took a class in psychology in high school and then again in college. And I've been so fascinated with psychology, what makes us tick. And all that is really what Steve talks about. For more than 25 years, Steve's been an innovator in areas of personal motivation, life, business consulting, family relationship dynamics, and personality and emotional development. His highly insightful yet unapologetically irreverent approach to each of these diverse disciplines has made Steve a much sought-after motivational speaker, teacher, coach, and agent of change. As a certified professional behavior analyst and the founder and CEO of the Behavioral Resource Group, which is where I took the test myself, Steve's passion is to utilize his expertise in human nature, behavior, and personality difference to help people discover their fullest potential. Steve also runs mastermind events and retreats centered on behavioral intelligence and relationship management at home and the workplace. I'm excited, Shawn. What do you say we jump right in?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for joining us today. How are things going?
Really well, thank you.
Steve, maybe you can tell us just a bit about your background, who you are, and how you got into this whole line of work.
Okay. So I'm a behavioral analyst, and what I do is I put people through a battery of questions or assessments, if you will, and what that does is generate a line of numbers for me, which basically is measuring emotional intensities on a scale. It's measuring a desire framework. In other words, when does your brain start to experience brain tension, and how are you going to attempt to reduce it, which we call tension reduction, meaning if I like to be in control of my space, but I'm not able to be in control of that space, I'm going to feel brain tension. So I got to make sure if I'm getting in the car, I'm behind the wheel, kind of a thing. So I'm measuring 7 different points of value there. I'm also using a Hartman value profile, which basically shows me what you pay attention to in your world outside of yourself and your world within yourself. We call those world scores and self scores. And then I'm looking at your bias. So when I put all these together, it really gives me a framework of how you tend to think, what kind of decision-making capacity you're going to have, how you see your future, pretty much how you're going to do things within the world and why you're going to do it that way. And this helps companies, individuals, families, whatever, help negotiate and navigate their shared existence between one another. That's pretty much what I do, and I been doing it about 12 years in the behavioral resource group, and we've got now clients in about 18 countries. So that began when I was a child, being able to read people. I don't talk a whole lot about this because it sounds a little bizarre, but my mother was so good at this that people called her a witch. My grandfather, people called him a seer. I mean, I watched him at around 10 years of age tell a gentleman that he just stole somebody's pocketbook, a woman's pocketbook, and the man denied it. And my grandfather told him it was in the trunk of his car. So he made this man open up the trunk of his car, and there was a woman's pocketbook back there.
Wow.
And I watched my mother, the phone would ring, and my mother would tell my father who it was, what they wanted, and it would be accurate. So very strange stuff I grew up with, but out of all three children my mom and dad had, that whatever that was sort of passed down to me. And so I sat in people's houses and the phone would ring and I'd tell them, I remember one distinctly, I told them there's a woman on the other end of that line and her husband's cheating on her right now. And it was true. So very weird things. When I got into the assessment world where we could measure people's emotional frame set, I think what I'm doing is I'm combining the science and what these mean with my superhuman intuition, and it's created a real sweet spot for me, which is why I don't even advertise. I wouldn't probably be able to handle the work if I did. People call me up and want me to be their business psychic and all this crazy stuff simply because of what I think. I have one client, I would contact him out of the blue. I'd be driving my car and I would see an image of his face and I'd call him or text him and he'd say, "Oh my God, your timing is unreal." And then he would call me back and tell me what kind of a jam he's in right now. Things like that, just very bizarre. I don't claim to know what it is. I just know what happens. And so that combination has worked really well for me in this world. And like I said, I talk about this on the podcast sometimes, not all the time, but I never talk to clients about those stories. I just do what I do and it helps them.
And now, what was that moment in time that became the catalyst for you to start pursuing this professionally? Was it when you started to see these assessments and then the ability to understand people in that way?
Yeah. So I was taking a college course, like at a satellite area up in Massachusetts in 2002. I actually, part of the course was going through an assessment like this, not this one, but like this. And I loved, it was my favorite class out of all the things I was doing. And I thought a lot about it. I felt really interested in it, but that was about the extent of it. And then my brother-in-law at one point, I had another business. I was actually a house painter. I was a house painter for 18 years. But what I was doing was, before I would do the contracting work, I would spend time with the homeowners or the owner of the business, whatever it was. And I'd basically be sitting with them, kind of reading their mail. And they would pay me sometimes to talk to them about their family problems, their business problems, whatever. And then after that moment, I'd go to work and I'd be like, dang, I wish I could just do this every day, help people out with these issues. And I went home one day and I told my wife what was going on. My wife said, "You need to get paid to talk to people." And I said, "Nobody's going to pay me to talk to them." And my brother-in-law, my wife's brother, said, "Why don't you take one of these assessments?" And it was familiar. It looked like the one I did in the class. So I took it and then I spoke to the individual that had me go through it. And as I was going through that conversation with him about myself, I said, "Gee, I'd love to do this." And he said, "I think you'd be really good at it. You have a graph for it." So I paid him basically $15,000 2 days later. And he trained me and mentored me over a period of 5 months. And then about 2 months later, I got my first consulting gig from a friend, recommended me to somebody. I went in and told them what all their problems were in their business based upon the graphs. And I made $8,000 in 4 hours. they went on to use me for the next 8 years until the company changed leadership. And so most of my clients stay with me for the full-on long term. Some of them have been with me 10 years. And so anyway, that's what happened. So I guess my wife was right. I'm getting paid to talk to people now. And since then, I've written 6 books. I've traveled around the world. And I feel like I'm doing what I am now. I'm not Steve Sisler, who has a job that in that work, it supports my family. I feel like I'm just waking up, being myself, and money shows up in my account.
Which is a good feeling, I know.
It's a great feeling.
And I guess that ties a lot back into understanding, having some self-awareness and understanding yourself. And I guess also the DISC profile and the Hartman Assessment. Can you maybe give a quick overview of those and maybe a few more questions? And then maybe we can actually, I know you have my scores. We can talk a little bit about that and how people can use that.
Yeah. So the DISC scores really are, there's 2 graphs. Some have 3, but the 3rd graph really is unnecessary and confusing. But DISC organizations that create the double graph, which is a concealed style or a natural self, and an intended style and adapted self, are really measuring your 4 primary emotions in 2 different environments. So the primary emotions are anger, optimism, patience, and fear. And it's those emotions, of course there's more emotions than that we have, but it is those primary emotions that really affect the way we'll do something. It affects how we do things within the world. In the natural style, it's measuring what we call your character base. It's what you're doing unconsciously because it's who you are. So there are major environments we find ourselves in the world, like our home environment, which lasts about 14 years. And then we have our school environment, high school, college. So we get into that environment, we're acting differently than we do in the home environment because our brains are negotiating the shared existence, which is, what do I expect of myself, my own needs, wants, and desires, versus what is expected of me by the people in that environment? And so this, where some people succeed and others fail, is in their ability to negotiate what they want for themselves and what other people want of them, and they're able to meet the needs of both parties, themselves and others. So living in shared existence is really an art form. So we're actually measuring your solution in the adapted graph, the intended behavior, to meeting the needs of each party within those 2 existences. So when you're going to work, you change your behavior so you can succeed and survive that environment. Maybe I have a boss that I don't think likes me. Well, guess what? My behavior is going to change. My emotions are going to change in an effort to succeed and survive in that world. So that's what I'm measuring. So I could look at a profile and say, gee, you're going to quit in 4 months. Because I see that what you're trying to do emotionally in your work environment is not sustainable. And it's probably sustainable for this long, if at all. Go ahead.
So if there's too big of a gap between the 2 graphs, that's where you see a dissonance.
Yeah, depending upon what kind of gap it is and which emotions are being affected. So not all great gaps are problems or challenges. Some of them are more opportunistic. It just depends on which ones are doing what. There's a lot there that can be unpacked. The longest debrief I ever had was 6 hours long in explaining to somebody what is going on. And then the Hartman, basically, it just pretty much shows how you view the world. To give you an example, like your empathy scores, how when you take yourself and put yourself in somebody's shoes, are you able to project what they're likely going to feel in relationship to what you're about to do or say? So I'm measuring your level of clarity on understanding exactly what that person's likely to do or say based upon what you're about to do. And then I'm measuring your bias. In other words, are you paying attention to it, and how much energy is going into making sure it's appropriate? And there are 4 levels there. So when I put all that together, it's sort of like a magic sauce, a magic soup. And I can say, okay, here's what's going on. I just did a woman yesterday, and she just broke down crying on the debrief when I started dismantling her life and telling her what's going on. She said, all my life, I'm 59, and all my life, I could never figure out what this was until now. So wow. It can be really powerful.
In relation to what you said in terms of the Hartman, I believe it was, is that similar to a 360-degree assessment where individuals are finding the congruency or incongruency between the perception that they have of themselves and others?
Well, these are self-assessments. They're not assessments of others and what others are thinking. There's no others involved. It's everything I do is self. Not all assessments are self-assessments. But self-assessments, in my opinion, are more important because we tend to behave in accordance to what we believe about ourselves. So if I believe this about myself, whether it's true or false is irrelevant. If I believe it, then it's going to affect the way I act. And so the Hartman is really getting into an overall broad value system. What do I value in the world, and how much attention am I giving to it? And when I go through, Chris, yours, you'll see exactly what I mean. Some of this stuff, it's easier to just show you than it is to explain it, because it can be a little complicated.
I would think, to kind of go back to what you were just mentioning, or maybe what Shawn was asking, by understanding ourselves, having better self-awareness and our profile, does that give us a better chance at emotional EQ and understanding other people?
Yeah, well, when you understand how you're wired, and I say this all the time, if you've heard any other podcast I've been on, I keep repeating it because it makes the most sense. If you're a tomato, then you should be in a salad. If you're a hammer, you should be in a toolbox. A lot of people are a hammer in a salad, and they're wondering why they're struggling. And I have people, they'll look at an assessment, let's say their dominant emotion, the anger emotion, the D is a 20. They're like, is that bad? I mean, look how low that is. Or it's a 2. I had a 2 the other day. Is that bad? I'm like, it has nothing to do with bad. Think basketball. If I take a basketball and try to use it in a football game, is it a bad ball? The answer is no. It's the wrong ball. Mm-hmm. It's not a bad ball. Like the basketball in a basketball game is perfect. You will win the basketball game with a basketball, but you will not win the football game with a basketball. So our behavior and the way our emotions are set, we need to, my collective teaching is about embracing who you are and embracing who you're not. So it's easier to put a tomato in a salad and enjoy that salad than it is to try to figure out how do I keep the tomato in the toolbox without crushing it.
Yeah, I think that's where, in my past experience with doing a DISC profile, that's where I believe I went wrong personally, is that I look at some of those areas as weaknesses and try to maybe improve upon them as opposed to using it as a compass.
That's exactly right. You don't want... Who opens the hood of their car and takes their battery out in the morning to get rid of the negative post so it's all positive?
Wait, that's not what you're supposed to do, Steve?
But you see what happens? It won't work. It doesn't even run now.
Yeah.
So your life is made up of both strength and weakness, and they are there for a reason. I mean, I've read a lot of the Bible, okay? I spent about 15,000 hours studying that book over the last 30 years and actually wrote a book about my findings. But in there, it even teaches through the apostolic writings of St. Paul. He says, I glory in my weaknesses because it's only then that I have any strength at all. In other words, the weaknesses I have, I keep them and embrace them as they are and capitalize on it by putting all my eggs in the strength basket. People that don't attend to their strength but spend a lot of time on their weaknesses do not do as well as people who spend all their time putting their eggs in the basket that they can carry. Mm-hmm. And so when I consult with companies and people and I look at their graphs, they always ask me, it never fails. What do I need to change about myself to be better? What do I need to work on? I say, nothing. What you need to do is recognize your strengths as strengths and put those to work. Find a suitable role or a position or a situation where your strengths are going to catapult you forward. Everything I do in life right now points to my strengths. It's my strengths. I mean, I failed math. I failed high school. The only reason why I graduated high school is because I took a special class after school so I could learn my fractions. That's the only reason why they let me graduate. My best class was art. The only reason why my last teacher in math decided not to give me an F but a D- was because he said I could draw shapes pretty good. So I had
sounds like me.
Deficit. I was on Ritalin. I can't spell. It's terrible. But yet I find success because I put all my eggs in the baskets in my life that work. And I use those. And I just ignore the other stuff. I'm not spending all kinds of time trying to figure out how to spell. I'm not trying to figure out math. What I'm doing, I have a partner who's a mathematician. So when we're building assessments and so forth, I use that. I don't know. I have intuition I'm bringing to the table. So that's what I depend on. And that's what I recommend everybody do. Find out what your superpower is and wear that. And then you can't fail.
And then also, I guess, going back to the empathy thing, say it's a loved one, or maybe it's in a work environment where maybe you're a boss and you have somebody that's working underneath you that you get so tired of them acting the same way. But if you understand that, okay, this is the way this person's brain is made up, maybe it helps you understand, okay, well, they're not going to change. So what can I maybe do to better accommodate them so they can succeed?
Yeah. And there's a fine line between using your behaviors as an excuse to consistently, create problems and challenges with people. I don't recommend that. Who we are is one thing. How we're making other people feel is another thing. So it doesn't mean if I'm an ass, I can say, hey, baby, that's just how I'm wired. I don't know. That's not true. So that's more emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence is all about understanding self, managing yourself, understanding others, and then managing the relationship you have with them. So there is a place where in our lives we have recognition as to what I'm doing and how it's affecting other people. And then when I'm with those people, be cognizant of that. We can do these things, for a sprint, not necessarily a marathon, but awareness will get you everywhere. And so we have to, walk that line where we are aware of the way we're acting and how other people are perceiving it, because we don't see people as they are. We see them as we are. So if I don't want anyone talking to me, then I don't want to talk to anybody else. So this is the difference between the golden rule and the platinum rule that my good friend Tony Alessandra came up with. He wrote the book, The Platinum Rule, which is not do unto others as they would have you, as they want to do unto you, but do unto others as they need you to do unto them. So the secret to customer service is finding out what your clients need and meeting that emotional need. So I may not want to do a lot of chit chat, but if you need that, I should provide it.
And management too, I guess, right?
Yes.
And now, Steve, I feel like some companies, not some, but all companies can benefit with having their employees understand this, right? But with companies that move so quickly, that can barely find time to pull people together. How do they start incorporating something like this, even just laying the groundwork? Is it having their employees do a DISC profile, bringing them together, just talking about their natural and adaptive style and just kind of chipping away?
I always begin with either the CEO or the owner. We work down to the upper C-level management, and we do that as a group. And then from there, teams, if they want to do it, and so on and so on. So that's how I do it. I have a company that I worked with for 3 years, pretty hard. I profiled over 300 new employees in 3 years. I helped them build their teams based upon, emotional difference, and they just sold for $630 million. Wow. And after they sold, they called me up and said, the owner, the founder of the company stayed on as CEO in the new company. Their trajectory is a little different. They're changing some things up. They created a new team, brought me in again. And we went through that C-level team, and here we go for round 2. And so, understanding how your people are wired, what works for them, what makes them tick, what energizes them, if you have at all can provide it for them. I got a company right now where one individual in the company is a problem, people-wise, they're a problem. What they do, they could do from home. It wouldn't affect anything. The owner is a little afraid that if they're at home, they won't work. Well, so he put me on retainer just in the last month. And I'm going to be having a phone call with him next week, and I'm going to say, send that woman home 20 hours a week. And don't you give it one thought. Productivity is going to increase with her workload. It's going to increase in the office. You just watch. And He basically said, you tell me what to do and I'll do it. We just set up a monthly budget for giving certain behavioral styles in the office a kitty, so that when they do something that they put their heart and soul into and it worked and it was effective or it was done on time or whatever, they get gift cards to Walmart. They get, I'm setting up a reward system for certain type people in there. We're doing all these things. So what we're doing is we're speaking to their behavioral profile. And when you do that, they whistle on their way to work. They don't regret going to work. They don't, feel the trepidation. They can't wait to get there, give it all they got. Because when they do, they feel their brain feels good. So we're creating systems around their brains so that his people will die for him. And it's just a process. It'll be set up within 2 months. And he'll increase in productivity, probably to the tune of 18 to 20%.
So this also takes, I guess, a lot of understanding of the company culture.
Yes. See, a lot of people have a company culture and it's a plaque on the wall, like we the people, here's how we think. But in reality, the culture is not the plaque. It's the brains behind every desk and out in the sales field or whatever, and how they think and operate. And typically the character of the kingdom emanates from the character of the king. In other words, whoever's the brainchild, their thinking style trickles down. They will tend to hire people much like themselves. And, it'll create certain dynamics in the organization. I had a company, they went through 9 managers in 13 years. And they were it was a joke. It was like every time we hire this person, they quit or the owner fires them. So when I started working with them, they wanted to do it again. And I said, let me find the person for you. So I did it. I did everything. I acted as a recruiter for them. I found the person and said, here's your man. And the guy laughed. He said, you're kidding me. Because it was a company where they were young professionals, millennial type stuff, people. And this guy was like 53 years old. And they're like, this guy's like everybody's dad. I said, I know, that's what you need. He said, dude, he blow dries his hair. This is their reasoning. This is why they can't keep somebody, because this is how they think.
Yeah.
And I said, trust me, because, they paid me $23,000 to find him. So they put the guy in. Within 3 months, he's vice president. Okay. And there are people in the organization saying, if you fire this guy, I'm leaving. And so, for a whole year, everything changed. Things are, that they sold now. They're sold. But in the end, after 1 year, the owner called me up. He says, Steve, I can't take it anymore. I'm going to let him go. I said, dude, it's up to you. It's your money, and he let him go. But I found out later that it was this guy that brought them to where they were and helped get them in a position for actual sale. And I helped him negotiate the sale because I profiled the person he was selling to. Anyway, it's fascinating how predictable people are when you understand how they're wired and what you're going to get out of them.
Absolutely.
I feel like it's a good segue into Chris's profile with understanding who Chris is. We'll put it out to the world.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll tell my girlfriend to take notes.
Yeah. So, okay. Just want me to be straight as an arrow on this, right?
Absolutely.
This is gonna be great. I gotta put my seatbelt on. Give me 1 second.
So I said to you in a quick little note, Chris, before we got on, I didn't look at your scores till 10 minutes before we went live here. Your pattern on your intended style went a little flat, which means you came across the center line. So everything's virtually between 40 and 60, which is overachievement or overthinking your answers. Mm-hmm. And then you said to me, I think I did do that, right?
Yep.
And you did. And likely the reason you did it is because your brain saw certain words that you initially thought, yeah, that's me. Then you thought, ooh, that doesn't sound that good.
Yep. I think you're exactly right.
See, I even know how you were thinking when you were doing this. Your profile is what I call a stabilizer. And a stabilizing profile is somebody who typically holds their cards pretty close and is a conflict avoider. And so you're very friendly, I would even say somewhat timid style, who sometimes as you're going out into an adventure or you're stepping into unknown territory and doing something a little risky, it can feel like you're navigating a minefield. You also have a high security need. In other words, it's like having a cricket sitting on your shoulder every day, whispering in your ear and asking you questions. So you're about to make a decision. Somebody's, kind of applying a little bit of pressure on you. You need to make this decision. Here are the financial costs. And you got this little cricket sitting on your shoulder going, are you sure you want to do that? Mm-hmm. Are you sure this is going to, and you it's like being on a high dive and you're rocking back and forth and everybody's yelling jump, but you're thinking about what happens if you land wrong. Like that's the emotion that you'll feel. So when things are pretty safe, you move forward more quickly. In other words, when you believe you can predict the outcome, you move a lot quicker than someone who just jumps off the cliff and builds their wings while they're falling. Is that making sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a very friendly, unassuming style. You also have a very independent streak. In other words, your brain looks like somebody who's in prison and they're coming up for parole, and they could be free. So your brain is looking at the world and all you're thinking of, I want my personal freedom and autonomy. You look like a teacher. You have a profile of somebody who would teach school.
I almost became a teacher.
Okay. If you were a teacher, you would be you'd be people's favorite teacher. That one teacher we remember, you would be that teacher. You probably have a fear of not being liked, a fear of failure, and a fear of being mischaracterized by other people. And so whenever you make a decision, you're wondering what they're thinking about the decision you're about to make. And if those planets align pretty well, then you're more apt to make that decision. If they don't, you're looking for other options. So rather than doing what you originally think you should just do, and just do it without really worrying about any other circumstance, you pull in other people into the mix. What's this person going to think? Or this person I really respect, what are they going to think about that? And these things come in and are always a part of your equation. Is that making sense?
Yes.
You're not a competitive person. You're very easily satisfied. If your brain is able to imagine, to think, and create something out of nothing, it's better than money for you.
Mm-hmm.
So entrepreneurial anything for you is work, because when it all comes down to it, you don't care about the money.
Yep, that's
you
to
need it, like all of us. And when you see other people having a lot of it, it's, yeah, that's great. But when it comes to doing certain things and putting forth a great amount of energy to get it, in your brain, it's just not worth it.
Yep.
So what happens is you end up like a starving artist. And unless you bring in another party who believes in you, sees your talent, and helps you capitalize on it, you will forever struggle to capitalize on your unique gifts.
See, that's the exact reason why I've linked up with Shawn.
Yeah, I already know that. Now, you also believe there's more than one way to skin a cat. In other words, you're very multi-threaded in your approach to solving your own problems. But you're very safety conscious. So your safety concerns limit your choices, not the choices themselves. Now, when I look at your Hartman, I see here that you have a very crystal clear view of other people in the world. And you are extremely optimistic and concerned about others, and you can become too personally involved with other people. You see the value in other people far sooner than you see it in yourself, okay? When you are about basically complimenting yourself, you have a negative bias. So what happens is your future is always brighter than your present. All your eggs, you end up emotionally putting them into the future. You say, well, next year I'm going to be this.
Yeah.
So all your eggs are in your future. So you neglect your present because your brain looks at your present, isn't satisfied, doesn't know what to do. So you just say, screw that. I'm not going to look there. I'm going to look to where I'm going. I'm going to look at what I'm going to become. So all your emotional energy is in who you're going to be, because you don't like focusing on who you actually are right now.
And so then that detracts from dealing with and tackling, I'm sure, certain obstacles that are in the present.
Exactly right. You end up staying in the foxhole, looking out, imagining taking the hill. But you say, one of these days, circumstances are going to be right, and we're going to grab that hill for all it's worth. But it never comes because you never deal with the present circumstance and get yourself in a position to deal with what you don't like, face it, deal with it, become strong because of it, and then your future happens. People's destinies are not sought after. People that are in their destiny allowed their destiny to come after them. Most people are chasing their destiny. They don't realize their destiny is within them. It's chasing them. So they're looking out into the future thinking what I'm going to do, who I'm going to be, how it's going to look. And they never get there. And so they're actually outrunning their potential. Your potential is already hardwired in. Whoever you're going to be All the ingredients are already there. But when you look at your present circumstance, you're not like that very fond of it. You're thinking about what it's going to be. You can't get there unless you deal with where you are now, embrace your circumstances, capitalize on your unbelievable strengths that you have and your teaching ability and all these other things that we could go into. But until you do that, your future will be hard realized unless somebody else pulls you along.
And maybe that's part of why I spend, I've built, a pretty good sized audience, and you do a lot of writing and speaking now to help other people. Maybe that's in a certain sense to avoid having to look myself in the mirror and figure out certain things I need to deal with.
That's exactly right. You see others as more valuable than you. Human beings, their brains focus on what they believe is important. That's why some children do their homework and others don't.
How would that tie into like the idea of imposter syndrome? I've had a certain amount of success, building my personal brand and business and everything, but it's sometimes I'm like, well, people will find out that I'm not that great of a writer or a speaker, or that all of this kind of stuff, and that maybe I'm not as good as what my accomplishments speak for.
That's right. You have a fear of being found out.
Yeah.
When you're speaking, your brain's thinking, I hope they don't ask questions in this arena because I'm not going to be able to answer them. In other words, your brain is focusing not on what you know and what you do and where your strengths are, but your brain is focusing on what you don't do, what you aren't, and you're afraid that you need this entire package or no package at all. Okay? So years ago, I spoke to a group of about 200 to 300 people, and I was talking about the brain, right? I had read a book, and I only read some of it. I read less than half of it. That sparked an idea, and my intuition kicked in. I thought, I wonder how true that is. Then I went on to Google, and I looked up some neural ideas around what I was thinking. I saw some evidence. I put it together. I went and did a 45-minute talk on it. There was an Asian man in the audience that beat a trail to me when we were done. He thought I was a neurosurgeon, right? I barely graduated high school, but he thinks I'm a neurosurgeon. He's Asian, so he's smart. It was because I put all my energy on what I did know and put no energy into what I could have known, thought I knew, didn't know, what I didn't even bother with that. I put all my energy in what I did know. And because of that, I had the appearance of authority in my subject. I spoke with passion, and I didn't care about that. I mean, I've been an EO speaker for 6 years. I spoke out at MIT 6 years running to the entrepreneurs group that comes in from all over the world. And, I'm one of the top 3 speakers. And there's plenty of times they ask me a question and I say, I have no idea. Next. And people come up to me and saying, that was my favorite part, the fact that you easily said you didn't know. Whereas some people, when that happens, they become a deer in the headlights. They feel exposed. I'm going to get found out. I'm not as smart as they think I am. So what I do is put all my eggs in what I do know, and that's the only thing I talk about. And I don't care about anything else. Go somewhere else if you don't like what I'm saying. I don't care. It doesn't bother me. And so it creates this, and now people pay me thousands of dollars to talk because I know what I'm talking about within a very small sliver of the universe. But that's my home. That's where I live. That's where all my eggs are. And so rather than trying to be all things to all people that I might win some of them, I said, this is who I am. This is what I do. If you want to be a part of it, call me. If not, call somebody else. And so I live in my sweet spot all the time. So some styles, they're negative and attentive to themselves. They don't know where they're amazing. And they're always trying different things, trying to come up with something and missing the one thing that they're likely very amazing at. And so they never really become amazing because they're looking for supernatural. And it just doesn't happen. You just have to figure out where's my basket, what is it, and then put everything in it. And when you do that, you can't fail. You can only succeed.
And I guess you end up having a lot more confidence in that arena.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I go to speak, I don't do anything. I don't study. I don't do nothing. I just show up. Because I'm talking about my subject. I'm talking about my stuff. There's not a question I can't answer in my realm of understanding. And I read and study all the time in that same arena. I stick with a very small sliver of information and different things like that. And I'm an expert in this little field where I work every day. I've done thousands of debriefs. I can do them blindfolded, in my sleep. I look at a graph and in 2 seconds, I know what's wrong. And so I'm not out trying to explain how I do it to satisfy anyone. Nobody gives a crap. All they want is an answer. If they call me, they'll get it.
Mm-hmm. That said, I am terrified to send you my graph.
So Steve, I have one more quick question about that. So say somebody listening here is that person that I am, or maybe somebody has an employee that is similar to my profile. How would you, I guess, begin that conversation, within yourself to better interact with somebody?
So you mean one style interacting with your style?
Right.
So interacting with your style, you have to be less deliberate and more laid back. So dealing with somebody like you, some of my easiest suggestions would be something like, when dealing with Chris, use commas and question marks, not periods and exclamation points.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with you, say with a very dominant, aggressive brain, I would say, I told you not to do this, and you did it again. You need to tell me what's going on here. If I was talking to you about the same thing and want to know what was going on here, here's what I would do. Hey, Chris, have we talked about this yet?
Mm-hmm.
And you go, I'm not sure. Like, what do you mean? Well, this, and this. I'm not sure if that's something we went over, or what's your take on that? Because I like what you're doing here, but here I'm a little confused, and it's probably me, but what are your thoughts on that? By the time we're done with that conversation, you feel like you enlightened me on what you're thinking, and then I can either accept it or reject it, or steer you in another direction. And when we get done, you're thinking, that was a great conversation. I really like Steve. I feel really good now that I'm more on track, and I don't feel like I was accused of anything.
Yeah, the other way I would have crawled into a corner.
Absolutely. I would never do that to you. So just because I know a couple little things about your graph, you're going to be a better man because you're under my leadership.
Yeah.
And people at work, they don't do that. It's dog eat dog, sink, swim, die trying. It's all about trying to make it at the expense of everybody around me. That's how our culture is. But the people that look at others and see them as valuable, and how do I increase their value, not only in my eyes, but in their own? How did Jim Jones get 900 people to drink cyanide for him in one of the greatest mass suicides in the history of the world? How did he do that? Because what he did was, when he dealt with people, he saw their weaknesses, he saw their strengths, and he played to their strengths. And he became one who is making observations around people, not accusations. And they loved him for it.
Yeah, really fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
Shawn, do you have any ideas or any thing jump out at you? You still want to work? You still want to work with me after all this?
I'm scared to ask if I have an I and a C that are completely the same in my natural and adaptive style. Is there something wrong with me?
Okay, that's a really good question. That's an outlier.
Maybe you can explain what those two mean too, and just for anyone.
Yeah. So what you've got going on there is two things. You've got basically optimism in the I, which is a limbic-driven brain type. You're making comparisons. So with you, it's not a friend, it's a certain friend. In other words, you look at people, and it's not like I'm just going to be friends with everyone. You're like, I'm going to be friends with these people, okay? Because your C is your fear emotion, and it's really that part of your brain, our third brain, your neocortex, that is basically logic and reason. You're reasoning through like solving a math problem. This is what we call an integrated brain. You're both right-brained intuitive and left-brained analytical, and you can switch between the two at will. So you can be almost very calculating, you can plan and things like that, and then all of a sudden you can also be outgoing, talkative, friendly, warm, sociable, animated. Those are two different parts of the brain. So you got your limbic systems in play and your rational mind is in play together. But you become very specific. And so you become preoccupied with developing new skill and talent all the time. Okay?
Sounds about right from how I know him.
Yeah, literally.
And you're going to be driven by a need to surpass other people. Like you're looking at the playground, you're like, mine's going to look like this. And everybody's going to want mine. And so that's what happens. And there's a fear of being out of the mainstream.
Fit in.
Yes. With the right people, not just anyone, the right ones. It's not driving any car, it's driving the right car. So everything is about the right thing, not anything. It's about the right answer, not any answer.
For anybody that's listening to this is incredibly scary because
is that accurate?
Steve, you have no idea how accurate that is. It's scary. Yeah, it's very scary. It's very interesting. Just from those two alone. And it's funny how you said I can go from very calculated to spontaneous because I believe it was my S, which is steadiness, that I was high in my natural, and then I was low, so a little bit more spontaneous in my observed or adapted, which I can flip flop between the two, and at times I feel extroverted and at times I feel introverted. But it's interesting because I always know when I'm being extroverted or introverted. I'm always cognizant of that.
Yes, you are, because you're in your rational mind. Your rational mind knows why, not just how. The person who knows how has a job, but the person who knows why is their boss. So you end up more, typically you'll gravitate towards leadership.
Very true.
So Steve, in times of stress, what happens to our personalities and these different levels? Are they increased or minimized?
Yeah, so in times of stress, we will revert to our more natural self. You have to think of your natural self like water. It seeks its own level, right? The water table. So if you have a leak in your roof, it somehow ends up in your basement. So water seeks its own level. People do the same thing. So under pressure, you will revert like to your most comfortable pair of shoes. That's your natural self. So even though we're making adaptations in our behavior through our emotions in an effort to succeed and survive an environment in shared existence with other people, under tremendous pressure, we go back to what we know really well, and we will go there. And so depending upon what your natural tendencies are, you will do. So what you'll do, Chris, is you'll, like a turtle, tend to pull into your shell under tremendous pressure.
Mm-hmm. And I'll stick to doing things that I'm really comfortable, familiar with.
Safe, comfortable, predictable, reliable. When you get in the canoe, you sit down and you put on a life jacket. Some people, when Donald Trump gets in a canoe, he doesn't wear a life jacket, he doesn't sit down. So he destabilizes everything he's around.
Yeah. So if we have a Donald Trump type of leader, boss, somebody that's very results oriented, that's very, they want the numbers right now. This is how they want them. like a lot of the people that reach out to me in the restaurant industry are they have these really intense bosses that they have trouble kind of connecting with, and as a result, like they're not happy at work, or it's just a kind of a weird situation. How would you suggest for folks to, I guess, best navigate those waters?
Well, people that are very aggressive and dominant in their brain are takers. And that sounds bad. It's not bad. Takers means whatever they believe, they do. Michael Jordan, Mark Cuban, Cher, Madonna, Donald Trump, they're all takers. Lady Gaga, taker. Okay? These are people that go in, they don't, show up in the music industry by accident. They kick the door in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they come in the front door with a shotgun. You, Chris, sneak around the back window with a jackknife.
Yep.
Okay, so they kick their way in. And so when dealing with those people, you have to deal with them in a very direct way. I had a client in New York that was from Switzerland who was very scary. He was so scary that the employees would crawl on their hands and knees by his window to go home at night, so he wouldn't see them leaving.
I had a boss like that.
Because if he saw them, he'd wonder where they were going at 5 o'clock. Okay? And these are like people in their 40s and wearing a business suit crawling. So I had to go in there and talk to this guy. And so I went in there, and he looked at me. He looked like a German SS officer from the 30s. Creepy, crew cut, steel blue eyes, staring a hole through me. And we had run assessments on the team. The average stay was 13 months. They couldn't take it anymore. They'd leave. And so I said to him, listen, you're scaring the people, and we need to fix it. I didn't beat around the bush. I just cut right to the chase because that's what he would do. So that's what I did. And he looked at me. He took his fist and he slammed it on the table. He leaned forward on his desk and looked at me and said, I'll tell you what these people fear.
Wow.
They fear these assessments. I just looked at him and I said, we're not talking about assessments. We're talking about you. Just like that. Now, that's not me being me. That's me being adapted.
Straight shooting.
He looked at me and he did this. That's a good point.
Because he would have appreciated that, I guess.
Yeah, he's logic-based. He's not emotionally in this conversation. It's logic and reason. I was right. So he's like, touche. Now, if he was emotional, he would have came back with, well, trying to recover, trying to save himself because he's emotionally involved. He was not emotionally attached at all. So he just looked at me and said, well, that's a good point. And we just went right through it, and I fixed it.
Wow.
And because I looked at him and I spoke his language. So if I go to a boss who's a doer, then I better have a solution in my back pocket or I ain't going in there. At least something. I don't go in there empty-handed. I don't know what to do. Then he's thinking, then get the hell out until you figure it out. I pay you to figure these things out. I don't pay you to come talk to me. That's what they think. And so I would go in there and say, listen, I was thinking this. I want to run it by you because you've got a really good mind. And they're thinking, yeah, I do. Of course I do. That's why I'm in the position I'm in. So I acknowledge that and I give him credit for it.
I feel like there's so much value for just in the DISC profile alone for a leader to not only do it on themselves, but maybe ask their employees to do it. And then the employees to see the leaders so that they understand how to talk to them, how to navigate through, and even to understand.
You can't waste those people's time.
Yeah.
That's why Trump, he wastes no time. Attorney General, I don't want to know if I want to work with you. Good, go home then, you're fired.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. Like, everybody looks at that and go, you narcissistic freak. No, you're in my way because dominant people do things in spite of people, not through them.
I know for me personally, being the opposite of that, I know I could have been a lot more effective and probably saved people time if I was more direct and didn't try to avoid problems.
Your profile's indirect.
And emotion-based.
And emotion-based, I'm direct and emotion-based. So, I just go right for it. I mean, I've said to clients, were you on crack when you made that decision? And they're like, oh my God. They're like, that's why I pay you. Because no one would do that to them.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody would dare do that for fear of reprisal, right? I just do it. And they just love me for it.
Very cool stuff, Steve.
It's absolutely incredible. I'm still blown away at you just nailing me off of the graft. I mean, not even seeing anything. And for anybody that's listening, I didn't send him a snapshot, nothing. I just told him that I was the same in those two areas and just nailed it.
Thank you, yeah.
Steve, yeah, we could go all day on this. We can start to wrap things up.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the 4 people types and some of the other stuff you're working on, and maybe how the 14 people types plays into all of this?
Yeah, so the 4 people types, I sometimes say it this way: mad, glad, sad, and scared. And I meet every Friday morning with a group of older guys, 70 plus, and one of them was an ethics philosophy teacher at a university for like 30 years. And he told me, well, there's actually 5 people types. I said, really? He said, yeah, mad, glad, sad, scared, and horny. He thought he got such a kick out of that. Anyway, I thought I'd share that. But there are 4 people types. When I say 4 people types, they all sport the same 4 primary emotions. It's just that one of them is elevated. And so we assign the elevated emotion to the type, okay? It's never just one. It's all 4 together that make up a personality type. Just like,
like a recipe.
I'm a glad and a scared at the same time. So those are both in play. So you see how that changes things dramatically. But if we talked about each type by themselves, the core types, then you'd have a certain type. So these 4 people types, some of them get along with others better than others and so forth. There's so many different dynamics surrounding them. And there's other elements that are brought into the mix. There's our values and our emotional intelligence levels and all that. In my book, The 4 People Types and What Drives Them, it's really 300 pages explaining the differences between these 4 thinking sets and how this tends to work. And so dominant people don't get along well with people like you, Chris. And thinking type people who are very analytical and exacting in their thinking don't really get along very well with spontaneous people, which is why you're a little bit of an anomaly, because you can go back and forth between the two. Mm-hmm. So what that does is it broadens your influence. And so understanding how those work and play out within the world is really important.
So that's maybe a good place, because I know most of your work is with larger corporations, consulting, speaking. Maybe that's a good place for folks to start in connecting with your work.
Yeah, they typically, email in or go to the site and, take an assessment. I don't typically give an assessment without a debriefing. You could get a disc graph anywhere. To give an example, I walked in my bank one time up north. This is about 8 years ago. I walked into the bank and the HR manager for all the banks was there. And somebody was there holding a disc assessment, not mine, but they had one. And in front of the HR manager of all the banks, I said, "Can I see your assessment?" to the girl. And she said, "Sure." I went to the disc page. I said, "Oh, I see you're quitting. When did you quit, or are you quitting?" She said, "Oh my God, Saturday is my last day." And so I ended up consulting that bank, doing all the people in that bank, helped 2 people through a divorce, predicted another person would be running their own bank, and they were in less than 2 years.
Wow.
So, it's just, it's unbelievable how once you understand how this works, you become a magician.
Yeah, absolutely.
That helps me understand people. So that's why I have to debrief, because you could look at a disc and get one thing. I look at it and you're like jaw drop. Mm-hmm. See?
And for anybody that's listening on the site, Behavioral Resource Group, there's a tab, Personality Types. It's very fascinating if you have a DISC profile or you do the DISC profile, just to look through that and see.
Yeah.
Steve, thank you so much. And now you are going to maybe need to offer me some sort of couples therapy or counseling to help my girlfriend through some of this.
Well, it's funny. So many times I'll do somebody's graph and then I say, now let me talk about your wife. Like, well, you don't have their profile. I said, I don't need it. I got yours.
Well, it's funny because she's a very good compliment. She's the one that gets in the canoe and starts rowing. She has all the ducks in a row and
of course.
The complete opposite of me and really exactly what I need. So
exactly. Yeah.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Chris, for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So that was our conversation with Steve Sisler. And Shawn, I can tell you I'm a little overwhelmed. I probably need a little bit of time to digest the last hour or so we spent with Steve, but a lot of great information. I really enjoyed the conversation. What are your thoughts?
I don't know, Chris. I don't know if we need therapy now after that or what. I mean, look, for anybody that could not see the video, I'm gonna put you out there, Chris. You were a little shifty. I think I saw a red face.
Guilty as charged. But Shawn, I can tell you what, you only gave him a few data points, and it sounds like he's got your number 2 big guy.
Oh my God, he did. It was a little scary. This was the first time that he heard my graph results. He didn't see anything. I just told him that my I and my C were on par. They were the exact same between my natural style and my adaptive style. And all he knew was that right there. And he just nailed it. It was giving me chills. It was wild. So for anybody that has not completed a DISC profile or had those assessments done, you can head over to the Behavioral Resource Group. That's behavioralresourcegroup.com. And you can look at the personality types. You can see his masterminds. You can take the profile, check it out. It's a really, really, really neat tool. And to connect with Steve himself, you can go to stevesisler.org. So with that, Chris, we'll turn it over to you. Why don't we end with a nice little quote?
Absolutely, Shawn. A pleasure as always. And we appreciate you guys joining us, whether it's your first time here with us or you've been around since the beginning. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. We would love it if you would stop by iTunes, Stitcher, wherever it is that you consume your podcasts, and leave a review. It would mean a lot to us. And with that, we're going to leave you with a Steve Sisler quote. We see people as we are, not as they are. From Steve Sisler himself. Thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you next time.